The rain was a cold, relentless curtain that night, a miserable symphony of drumming on rooftops and gurgling in the gutters. It was the kind of rain that seeped into your bones, a chill that no amount of wool or prayer could ward off. And there I was, standing in the middle of it, clutching a worn suitcase, the cheap cardboard already starting to soften and warp from the moisture. My wedding ring, a simple silver band, felt like a cold, constricting noose on my finger. The very house I had called home for the past 3 years was now a fortress of indifference, its windows glowing with a warm, deceptive light that seemed to mock my exile. Inside, my in-laws, Harold and Margaret, were likely settling in for the night, secure in their righteousness. My husband, Richard, stood on the porch, sheltered under the overhang. His face was a mask of anguish, but it was a performance I'd seen before. The same pained expression he wore when he had to tell me he'd missed another job interview, or that he'd lost another week's pay at a poker game. He was a man tragically in love with his own tragedy, and I was his favourite supporting character. He fidgeted with the keys in his hand, keys to our car, which he had just pulled out of the driveway. The same car I had paid for with my salary from the diner, working double shifts while he chased his entrepreneurial dreams, that always seemed to involve a lot of expensive lunches and very little profit. "Sorry, Clara," he called out, his voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "They just think it would be better if you took some time, just until things settle down. The baby was their only grandchild, they're just grieving. I almost laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that was swallowed by the storm. We had lost our baby girl, Lily, 6 months ago. A stillbirth. It was a wound that still festered in my soul, a phantom limb that ached with every heartbeat. And Harold and Margaret had decided with the cold, surgical precision of a judge passing sentence that my grief was the problem. It was too consuming, too dramatic. It was bringing down the mood of the household. It was, in their eyes, a selfish indulgence. "I was just trying to talk about her," I screamed, the words ripping from my throat, raw and desperate. "I wanted to remember her, but you all just pretend she never existed. You locked up her room, you threw away her things." "It's for the best, dear," Margaret had said earlier, her voice a placid, unyielding lake. "Constant dwelling on the past is unhealthy. You need to be strong. For Richard, we're doing this for you even if you can't see it right now. A change of scenery will do you good, some time to think. We've asked you to leave before and we're being patient, but this time we have to be firm. It's not good for anyone." Firm. They had tossed me out into the rain like a piece of trash. They had commandeered my marriage, my home and my grief, and now they were exiling me from the only family I'd known since my own parents passed away. They were wealthy, you see, not millionaires but comfortable. Harold owned a chain of hardware stores, a self-made man who'd built his empire on a foundation of relentless practicality. Margaret was the social queen, the chairman of every committee, the arbiter of taste in their small insular town. They saw me, a waitress with no money, no family and no prospects, as a liability, a stain on the family name, and now with my failed pregnancy I was a broken piece of merchandise. Richard didn't argue, he never did. He told me he loved me, but his love was as flimsy as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. He was too afraid of his parents, too financially dependent on them. They had paid for our wedding, they had given us the down payment on the house, their house really, as they were always quick to remind us. We were tenants in our own lives and the landlord had just evicted me. The suitcase was getting heavier. My clothes were soaked through, my hair plastered to my scalp. I looked at Richard one last time. I searched his eyes for a flicker of defiance, a glimmer of the man I thought I'd married. But all I saw was relief. Relief that the conflict was over. Relief that he didn't have to choose, he had already chosen. And it wasn't me. "Goodbye, Richard," I said. It was not the word of a grieving wife. It was the finality of a door closing. I turned my back on the warm, glowing house and walked into the rain, not knowing where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. I had $23 in my pocket. No car, no cell phone. The Greyhound station was 2 miles away. I walked. The next few years were a blur of diners, greasy spoons, and coffee pots. I worked in a place called the Rusty Nail in a town 100 miles away from them. The owner was a gruff, 40-something man named Leo who had the heart of a saint buried under crusty exterior of cynicism. He was missing 2 fingers on his left hand and never talked about them. He gave me a job when I had nothing but a story of woe that I was too proud to tell. He saw my pain, the deep, hollow sadness in my eyes, and he never asked. I rented a tiny room above the diner, a space so small that the single bed and a hot plate took up most of the floor. The walls were thin and I could hear the pipes groaning all night. It was perfect. It was mine. The first thing I did was take off my wedding ring. I stared at it for a long time, this symbol of a love that had been conditional, fickle. Then I took it to a pawn shop and got $75 for it. It felt like a transaction. I was buying my freedom 1 ounce of silver at a time. I started saving. Every spare dollar, every quarter, every nickel I found on the floor. I had a small glass jar that I kept in my small, dingy closet. The first $100 felt like a monumental victory. Then 1,000. My life was a simple, brutal equation. Work, eat, sleep, save. I stopped thinking about Richard. I stopped thinking about Lily, or rather I allowed myself to think about her, but the memories that had once been a source of crippling pain began to transform. I remembered her tiny heartbeat on the monitor. I remembered her name, a whisper of a song, and I let go of the anger at my in-laws, at Richard, at myself. It was a slow, arduous process, but I purged it from my system. Leo noticed the change. He saw me starting to smile again, not the polite server's smile, but a real one. He'd sometimes give me an extra slice of pie at the end of my shift, or let me take the last of the day's soup home for my dinner. One night, after a particularly busy shift, he sat down across from me at a booth. He was nursing a cup of black coffee, and the neon sign outside flickered and buzzed. "You're not going to be working here forever, are you, kid?" He asked, his voice gruff. I looked at him, startled. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "I've seen it, that look in your eye. You got a plan." I smiled. "I'm saving up." "What?" I hesitated. "For a home, not just a house, a place I can own, a place where nobody can ever tell me to leave." He studied me for a long moment, the man who had given me a second chance. "My buddy Joe is selling his diner over in Millbrook. He's retiring, wants to move to Florida. It's a good spot, has a little apartment above it like this place. He's asking a fair price, far less than what it's worth, but he wants to sell quick." "You want to maybe take a look at it?" My heart pounded. "Leo, I have some money, but not enough for a business. You got a good head on your shoulders, Clara. You know food, you know how to manage a place. You've practically been running this joint for the past 6 months while I've been dealing with my back. I'll be a silent partner. I'll put up half the money. You pay me back out of the profits. We go 50-50. "What do you say?" I stared at him, tears welling in my eyes. This was the kindness of a stranger, a man who had asked for nothing in return but a decent day's work. It was the antithesis of everything I had known. It was a way out, it was a new beginning. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, Leo, 1,000 times yes." Millbrook Diner was a little slice of Americana with red vinyl booths, a long formica counter, and a jukebox that only played songs from the 50s. It was slightly run-down, but the bones were good. The kitchen was efficient, and the locals were a friendly bunch of farmers, truck drivers, and shopkeepers. I worked myself to the bone. I painted the walls, scrubbed the grout, and streamlined the menu. Leo was right about my head for business. I knew what people wanted. Simple, honest, hearty food at a fair price. Within a year, the diner was making a comfortable profit. I was paying Leo back dollar by dollar. I bought a small 2-bedroom house on a quiet street. It wasn't much. The previous owner had let the garden go wild and the paint was peeling on the shutters, but it had a big front porch and a kitchen with a large bay window that let in the morning sun. It was the first house I ever owned. The feeling of standing in the living room with the deed in my hand was indescribable. It was solid. It was real. It was mine. I got a dog, a big, goofy golden retriever I named Nugget. I filled the house with plants and books. I was happy, a quiet, steady, unassuming happiness that was mine. I had put the past behind me, or so I thought. But fate, as they say, has a wicked sense of humor. It happened on a Thursday, a slow afternoon at the diner. I was polishing the coffee machine when an old customer named Frank came in. Frank was a retired farmer who was a walking repository of town gossip. "Say, Clara," he said, settling onto a stool. "You've been in these parts for a while now. Did you ever live over in Ashford?" The name hit me like a slap in the face. Ashford, the town where Harold and Margaret lived, where I had been thrown out. I kept my voice steady. "A long time ago." "Why?" Frank chuckled, stirring his coffee. "Just heard the damnest thing. You know the old Beaumont mansion on Maple Street, the big one, the one with the old sycamore tree that everybody thought was haunted." I nodded, a knot forming in my stomach. I knew it well. It was the house I had been evicted from. Well, old man Beaumont died a few years back and his kids sold it to a developer. The developer went bankrupt, so it's been sitting empty. But the folks who owned the hardware store, the Bakers, I think, they had their eye on it for ages. They bought it a while back, spent a fortune fixing it up, turning it into some kind of grand statement. Bakers, Harold and Margaret, they had bought the house I was thrown out of. They had renovated it, probably intending to show off their success to the world. "What happened?" I asked, my curiosity a dangerous, seductive thing. "Luck, I guess," Frank shrugged. "Harold Baker, the old man, he's been sick. A stroke, I think. The doctors say he needs to be in a care facility now, which costs a fortune. And they've been making some bad investments. The son, Richard, he was always a fool. He tried to take over the business and ran it into the ground with some crazy scheme. Lost a pile of money. Anyway, they're selling it. The house. The bank is looking to unload it as is. It's a massive white elephant. Nobody wants a property that big in this market, not for what the bank wants for it. The wheels in my head started to turn. It was a terrible thought, a vengeful thought. It was everything I had striven to leave behind. But it was also a strange, powerful opportunity. I had money now. I had a successful business. I had the means. And the thought of owning that house, the house that had become a symbol of my humiliation, was intoxicating. I didn't make a decision right away. I went home that night and sat on my porch, scratching Nugget behind the ears. The memory of that night in the rain was as vivid as if it had been yesterday. I remembered the cold, the desperation, the sheer cruelty of being told my grief was an inconvenience. I remembered the way Richard had looked at me with his weak, apologetic eyes. I remembered Margaret's smug, self-righteous face and Harold's cold, distant stare. But I also remembered the vow I had made to myself in that tiny room above the rusty nail, to let go of the anger, to build a life for myself. Was this an act of vengeance, or was it an act of closure? For 2 weeks I wrestled with my conscience. I looked at the numbers. The asking price was surprisingly low. The real estate market in Ashford was in the doldrums. The house, while beautifully renovated, was too large and too expensive to maintain for most people. It was a white elephant, and I, with my solid financial portfolio and a thirst for the past, was the only potential buyer the bank had seen in months. I contacted a real estate agent, a sharp young woman named Amelia. She didn't know my history. She just saw a successful businesswoman with the cash to buy a distressed property. We went to see the house. It was strange to walk through the front door again. Everything was different. They had knocked down walls to create a grand open-plan space. The kitchen was a chef's dream, filled with gleaming stainless steel appliances. The chandelier in the hallway was a masterpiece of crystal and light. It was opulent, it was gorgeous, it was also strangely soulless. It had been gutted of its history. It had been turned into a showroom. I could see the ghost of the old house underneath. The banister I had held onto while I was pregnant, the living room where we had announced the pregnancy and where Margaret's smile had been tight and brittle. The nursery, the room that had been meticulously prepared for Lily and then locked away the day she died. I stood in the hallway, my hand resting on the sleek new wall. The ghosts were everywhere, but they were my ghosts. They were part of my story. The house was the ultimate symbol of my in-laws' power, but owning it would be the ultimate act of reclaiming that power. I wasn't doing it to hurt them. I was doing it for myself. I was buying back a piece of my soul. The day of the sale was a sunny Tuesday. I sat in the bank's offices, signing the last of the paperwork. Amelia was beaming. The property was mine. Legally, irrevocably mine. As I was leaving, I saw them. Harold looking frail and hunched in a wheelchair, his face a mask of bewilderment. Richard thinner, gaunt, with a desperate look in his eyes. And Margaret, I almost didn't recognize her. The iron-haired, perfectly coiffed woman was gone. Her hair was a mess of greying strands, her lipstick was smeared, and her eyes were red-rimmed. The polished armor of her social standing had crumbled. She looked like a woman who had been broken by the very life she had tried so hard to perfect. Our eyes met across the marble floor of the bank lobby. I saw it in hers. Recognition. Shock. And then the slow dawning of horror. It wasn't an abstract buyer. It was me, the girl they had thrown out in the rain, the unstable waitress, the daughter-in-law they had discarded like a used tissue. Richard saw me too. His mouth fell open. He took a stumbling step forward. "Clara," he breathed. "Is that really you?" I walked towards them, my heels clicking on the polished floor. I was dressed in a smart cream-coloured suit. I wore a small, tasteful gold necklace that had been a present to myself on the day I paid off the last of my diner loan. I was not the scared, sobbing woman they had expelled from their lives. I was strong, I was composed, and I owned their house. "Hello, Richard," I said. "Hello, Margaret, Harold." Margaret's eyes were wild, shifting from me to the papers I held in my hand. That's you," she stammered. "You bought our house." I held up the deed. "Yes, I did. I thought it needed a fresh start. Someone to appreciate it." "But how?" Richard asked, his voice a croak. "How could you possibly afford it? You had nothing." "I started a diner," I said, my voice calm. "I worked hard, I saved, I made a life for myself, I bought a house for myself, and now I'm buying this one. It's a beautiful property, a shame to let it go to waste." Made a gurgling noise in his throat. He was trying to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He looked so diminished, so pathetic. The man who had controlled so much was now a prisoner in his own broken body. Margaret's composure finally shattered. "You're doing this to spite us," she hissed, her voice loud enough to echo in the quiet lobby. "You're the spiteful, vindictive creature I always knew you were. After everything we did for you, we gave you a home. It took every ounce of my willpower to stay calm. The anger bubbled up inside me, a hot, familiar rage. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to throw it all back in her face. The cruelty, the humiliation, the loss of my child, the loss of my marriage. But then I remembered the rain, I remembered the cold, I remembered the promise I made to myself in that tiny, cold room. I took a slow, deep breath. "What did you do for me, Margaret?" I asked, my voice quiet. "You housed me in your house, yes, but you didn't give me a home. You made sure I knew it was yours. You'd throw me out at a moment's notice, and you did. You threw me out because my grief was an inconvenience to your family. You threw me out in the rain with nothing but a suitcase and $23. Richard's face was pale. "Clara, please, it wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that, Richard," I said, turning to him. "And you let them do it. You stood on the porch and watched me walk away. You chose them. And now, look at you, you have nothing. You're both bankrupt and broken, and you're looking at the woman you destroyed, standing here with the keys to your castle." I paused, the weight of the moment heavy on my shoulders. I looked at the deed in my hand. It was just a piece of paper, but it was a symbol of a profound journey. It was a testament to my resilience, and it was a perfect opportunity. "I'm not here for revenge," I said, my voice softening. "I didn't buy this house to gloat or to make you suffer. I bought it because I loved the house. I loved the memories I had there before you turned them into poison. I bought it because it was a piece of my past I wanted to reclaim, to make it my own." Opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "You don't have to leave right away," I said. "You need time to sort things out. I'll give you a month to find a new place." It was a small act of mercy. It wasn't forgiveness. I don't think I could ever truly forgive them. But it was a release. It was a shedding of the chains of the past. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one in control. And the most powerful thing I could do was not to punish them, but to show them that I had risen above their pettiness, that I was the one who had truly won. Not by taking their house, but by building a life so solid, so full of dignity, that their cruelty could no longer touch me. Richard looked at me, his eyes a sea of regret. He looked like the ghost of the man I had once loved. He was a product of the same life that had tried to break me, and I felt nothing but a hollow pity for him. The love was gone, replaced by a cold indifference. I turned and walked out of the bank, the deed clutched in my hand. The autumn sun was warm on my face. I walked to my car and drove back to Millbrook. I opened the door to my little house, and Nugget came bounding towards me, his tail wagging furiously. I knelt down and hugged him. The house was full of the smell of lavender and old wood. It was quiet, it was peaceful, it was home. The house in Ashford was just a building now, a beautiful empty shell. I decided not to live in it. The idea, oh,